of God. However, that cannot be considered to be a truth. The truth is that the Bible does contain many contradictions. The first problem is, what is the Bible? The very first problem stems from even defining the Bible itself, because until today, what is the Bible has not been decided upon. I don't want to get into the history of it right now, because that's something that I want to go back to. The history of the biblical text. How the Bible that we have today came to be the Bible that we have today. But what I want to look at is the Bible internally. And specifically here, not the Bible in general, but I want to look at the New Testament. The New Testament is composed of 4 Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are the 4 Gospels. The Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Mark, the Gospel according to Luke, and the Gospel according to John, or so they are called. Then we have something called the Acts of the Apostles. The Acts of the Apostles actually constitutes a larger body of literature than the actual Gospel or the Gospels of Jesus. And then we have within the New Testament as they call it, some letters, some various letters sent by some apostles and by some disciples. And then, of course, at the end we have the book of Revelations. And this is what is composed, this is what we call the New Testament. Now, within that body of literature, we find contradictions. And we find the contradictions from the very beginning. For example, we have 2 different, contradictory genealogies of Jesus. 2 of the Gospels present for us the descendants of Jesus. Jesus was descended from such and such, who was descended from such and such, who was descended from such and such. And they contradict each other. Not only do they contradict each other, but we also find that they contradict the Old Testament. So there is a contradiction between these 2 genealogies. And then there is also a contradiction between the information contained in these genealogies and the information we find in the Old Testament. This is a problem. Then we find other contradictions. For example, we find the Gospel almost inevitably. Every single event that is described in the life of Jesus has a small difference, and sometimes quite a large difference, in a description of the events. For example, the so-called resurrection of Jesus, when Jesus is supposed to be resurrected and comes out of the tomb. We have different descriptions. In one of the Gospels it tells us, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb. That's just her on her own. In another Gospel it says, 3 of the women went to the tomb. In another Gospel it says, all the women went to the tomb. In one it says they saw 2 angels. In another one it says they found 1 angel. So we find that the accounts are different. And these type of contradictions occur again and again between the Gospels. In many, many different events. And we don't need to list them. This information is widely available. If you are interested in it, to go into it deeper, we can make that easily available for you. But there are literally, we could say, maybe hundreds of contradictions. We could probably boil them down to 50 or 60 very clear and obvious contradictions that cannot be explained. Now, some people, they say in response to this is what I've heard, some Christians say in response to this, well, of course there's going to be contradictions. Because these are the accounts of the life and the teachings of Jesus written by men. And these men, as they claim, were witnesses to the events, but because they witnessed them from different angles and from different viewpoints, they wrote down different accounts. Although I would still not be very satisfied with that, it would still be a good start, because we would have to say then, well, that's exactly what we're saying. You can't claim then that the Gospels are the Word of God. The Gospels are actually the accounts of human beings with mistakes and with contradictions who looked at things from a different angle. So you can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it. You can't keep the cake, looking there all nice and pretty, and eat it at the same time. You can't have the Bible being the Word of God and the accounts of men. It's either the accounts written by men who made mistakes and looked at things from different angles, or the Word of God. You can't have both. It's one or the other. Of course, Christians then try to get round that by actually redefining what they mean by the Word of God. Then they start redefining it and saying, no, it's not actually the Word of God, like the Ten Commandments, actually they're inscribed in stone. No, this is something that God moved men to write. So it was sort of inspired, that God sort of motivated them and moved them and sort of, maybe the Spirit came down and sort of motivated them to write down these things. But you see the danger. From being motivated to write down something, and that motivation came from God, is very, very far from it being the Word of God. So this is our first problem. There is no truth at all in the claim that the Bible is the Word of God. That cannot be substantiated. It cannot be proven. It's not a position that can be held. And if it's not the Word of God, and it is the accounts of human beings, then surely we have to realize that is open to some serious type of questioning. We want to know how valid these accounts are. How accurate are they? How truly do they represent a picture of what went on? And here's another problem, is that many Christians would like to imagine and would like us to believe that the gospel is a factual, or the gospels are factual accounts of something that really happened and things that Jesus really said and really did. And now I want to question this as well. I want to question this. First of all, there is internal evidence within the Gospels and within the New Testament itself